The other day, somebody asked me if I missed playing live because I had been playing live since about age 15. And it's been many decades playing all the time in different kinds of bands: country, rock, metal, dance, all sorts of groups, tribute bands, original projects. And I thought about it and I was just like, you know what? There are so many things that I miss about playing live. And I think I'll do another video on that sometime after this one. But I also could think of about 10 reasons why I don't miss playing live. Now, this isn't meant to be negative. It's not meant to rip on anyone who does play live. It's just after doing something for so long, there's bound to be things that you don't like about it. And hopefully those with live experience can relate to what I'm saying and can maybe just laugh along or cry along. Or if you've never played live before, maybe it can be a little bit of a warning of what to expect, and you could even find ways to avoid some of these things that I've come across. Loading in and out of the gig. What a lot of people don't realize is that it's not just like you load your gear in, play, unload, and you're done. You have to go from your studio or your house, load into your car first, go to the show, load in, set up, play the whole show, then you load out at the end, drive back, and then you unload everything. So really it's 4 stages of loading altogether. So when you have a lot of gear, it can be really tough because it was a lot of stairs that I had to climb. We had a 1-person elevator that we had to take turns loading in from. So even if you had all your gear, you couldn't just put it all in and go. You had to take little bits at a time, and it took a long time just to get in. We've had a few shows where the crowd would be there already, and we had to load through the crowd. Here I am with my guitar and my amp head, and I still had a lot of stuff to carry in, and we're trying to get through the crowd, and nobody would move. So it really made loading in way harder than it had to be, and that's happened several times. I've played in some really terrible gig conditions. I remember one time we pulled up to a venue that had both an outdoor and an indoor stage, and it was about 55 degrees, and I was like, there's no way they're going to have us play outdoors today, because it's so cold. So I show up to the show, and everything was on the stage outside. So I was like, oh my God, okay, I guess we're playing out in 55-degree weather. I was mostly worried about our singer, though, because singing in really cold weather can really hurt your vocals. We've played in barns before, and I have really bad allergies, so when people started dancing, you could see the dust coming up from the hay. This was a country band, obviously, but it got to the point where I could not breathe. I would sit there and play, barely get through the set, have to run outside, use my inhaler. One time we played in somebody's living room. So the load-in was a little bit hairy, to just try to fit it all in the guy's living room. And then to play was kind of rough because he had cats, and I have really bad allergies to cats. So it was the same story. I had to run out after each set and try to breathe in fresh air, but it was winter time. So it was freezing air, so it was this terrible night for my lungs. We actually ended up having a lot of fun, but it was the most claustrophobic I ever felt at a gig. And then, of course, way back in the old days, we used to play bars where they allowed smoking. So for 3-4 hours, we're stuck in this small bar at times, full of smoke. I mean, all your clothes smelled like smoke. Then you would get in your car and that would smell like smoke. And just overall, it was just a bad scenario for musicians who didn't smoke back then. I played plenty of shows where the audience would rather not have us there. So one time we were playing, and the Minnesota Vikings, because I'm from Minnesota, were playing a pretty important playoff game. And we were trying to play our show, and I remember looking out into the crowd, and they were not happy. They were looking past us, because behind us, this is a bad idea, behind us on the stage was a big television screen, and they were playing the game literally behind us as we played. So we would think that they're cheering because of something we were doing, and all of a sudden I'd look back and like, oh, the Vikings just scored. Okay. We also played a club that was more known for being a dance club. So every time we'd go up to play, the crowd was more annoyed than anything. And so we would do our set, we'd play half hour, 45 minutes, whatever. And they were pretty much just standing there with their arms crossed, just waiting. And all of a sudden the DJ would say, all right, give it up. Now we're going to play some music and during their intermission. And they'll be back in about a half hour. And during that half hour intermission, they would play all the biggest dance hits at the time. So everybody would flood the floor and just start having a great time. And then we were backstage looking out. We're like, oh, should we even go back out? This is bad. But we ended up having to do 3 sets. Yeah, you would think over all those years I'd get used to dealing with drunk people. And I guess I did a little bit. I knew how to talk to them so they wouldn't get agitated, or, you kind of make friends with them by saying certain things and then hopefully getting out, and hopefully they don't notice you trying to get away if you don't want to talk to them. But sometimes you're on stage and somebody, like this happened a lot, somebody would be really drunk in the front row, they'd be holding their drink, and they'd be hovering right above your pedal board, or in one of the shows, it was my friend's keyboard. And they'd be like doing this, and you would see it spill a little bit. You're just like, hey, back up, you know. And some people got so drunk they just would jump onto the stage and start trying to sing or dance or play tambourine. And that's always awkward because we didn't always have security. One time my friend Matt was playing and a guy was going to charge the stage. And he ended up taking his bass off and cracking the guy with the top of his bass because there was no security and he had to do something. I saw Keith Richards had to do this once. I saw a clip of it. It was pretty wild, but sometimes you just have to take matters into your own hands when you're on stage because you're kind of vulnerable. You know what I mean? If somebody throws something or somebody runs on stage. And so sometimes you have to use your instrument as a weapon, sadly. And of course, people will always be screaming Freebird or they'll be yelling their requests while you play. You know, I was in the Heart Tribute Band and it says right on the sign, Heart Tribute Band. And people would run up and say, can you play What's Up by Four Non Blondes? And we're just like, we're a Heart Tribute Band. And that happened a lot, surprisingly. This one time after a gig, these two guys were pretty drunk. And we were loading out. And I remember I was carrying my PV out to my car. And all of a sudden this guy comes up and he goes, hey, let me help you carry your amp to your car. And it wasn't that far away. I'm like, no, dude, I got it. It's cool. You know, I could tell he was drunk. I didn't want to upset him. He seemed a little bit on edge, you know. So I'm like, it's cool, man. I can do this. I'm strong enough. And his friend came up to me then, and they sort of like walked on either side of me. So I was already getting that vibe, like something's going on here. And his friend goes, you better let him carry your amp. I'm like, why? He goes, because he has a gun. And his friend had one of these big cowboy coats on. I don't know what they're called, but he pulls it back just to show me that he had a gun on the side of his hip. I was like, what is this, the Wild West or something? I was thinking. And so I was like, it's okay. My car's right there. So I kept walking. And they stopped. And it was one of the scariest times of my life because I was like, okay, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're just going to walk away or I'm going to hear a loud bang and that's going to be it. So that's one of those times where drunk people can be fun. But if you're not careful, it can quickly escalate to some pretty hairy things. So I do not miss those kind of situations. There were a lot of dangerous times that went along with being around a lot of drunk people late at night, and that was just one of them. I'm from the old school teenage metal band years. You know, when we were younger, we would be happy to play a half hour. 45 minutes was a long time. Once in a blue moon, as they say, you'd have to play 2 sets, and even that would be only maybe 90 minutes tops. But when I started getting into other bands after the metal band broke up, I was surprised to find out that we had to play from 9 to midnight or 9 to 1. So what you would do is you would play 45 minutes or an hour. You would take 15-minute break, half-hour break, and you would try to fill up all that time. So back in the day, it still might be like this. They really thought 9 to 1 was the way to go. Then the bar stayed open later till 2. So things got even crazier. But it wasn't unusual to have a band play 3 or 4 sets to fill up the entire night. It just seems like way too much for a musician to have to play that many songs in one night, especially for what they end up paying you. So ever since I can remember, I've always made less than or about $100 for every show I've played. And, you know, there are times when we got more if we played a big wedding or some big event or something. And so I never really complained about the money, but I did notice over time, nothing ever changed. It was always, well, you're going to make about $100 a night. And so when we're playing these 3-hour shows and you're going to the show early, you're setting everything up. And like I said, when I started getting into lighting, it got really crazy. Play the entire show, 3 hours, tear down, load out everything into your car. Sometimes it could be up to an 8-hour day of work. And so if you divide that by the approximate amount we would get, let's say 80, just somewhere in the middle, you realize you're making about $10 an hour. And then if you do that long enough, you start to go, is it really worth it? You know, you start to really just play because you love playing. You don't even consider the money after a while. And that's kind of sad if you are a working musician and this is going to be a big part of your income. But luckily for me, towards the end, I wasn't worried about the money side of it. But it was still kind of a bummer to realize that all these working musicians are still getting about as much, if not less, than they did 20, 30 years ago. I love music so much, I felt really sad the day I started to dread playing certain songs. So when I was in this variety dance rock band for a while, I played keys and guitar, so it kept it exciting for a while for me, and I sang backup vocals. But what was weird was when I started to dread the next song on the list. So we would have three set lists because we'd play 3 hours. And I would see like I Love Rock and Roll's coming up. And my heart would just go, ugh, because I played it so many times. You just get kind of tired of it. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to grow to hate these songs. I mean, I love rock and roll. I grew up with it. But when you have to play it 50 times at 50 different gigs, eventually you just go, oh man. So not only would I get tired of songs that I used to love, but I also had to play songs I wasn't crazy about either. And that's just part of being in a cover band. You do have to play a lot of music that you don't enjoy, that you probably wouldn't listen to in your car on your way to the gig. But yeah, it just got to the point where I was playing songs I didn't like, and sadly I was dreading songs that I used to like. I would develop these real bad habits playing all the time, and whenever we were consistently gigging, like every weekend, maybe 2 times on a weekend, it got to the point where I was developing pretty bad habits. Now, I only have myself to blame for that, I know that. There's a time when I was breathing in smoke all the time, like we were talking about earlier, and I have moderate asthma, so that wasn't good. But I chose to play in a band, so back then it was my fault, you know. And then I started having a few drinks before certain sets. You know, when you play in a country band, it almost seems like a given. So I remember having my first time throwing up was after one of our country gigs. And I threw up so hard, I went out and my singer was laughing because, you know, he knew what was going on. And he was like, your first time throwing up from drinking, huh? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, pretty intense. Probably felt like your boots were going to come up and out, huh? And then you almost can't help but eat the crappy bar food. So let's say you have a couple drinks, it's been a long gig, you start to get really hungry. Nothing sounds better than crappy food after you've been drinking and after a long night of playing music. So what is there at most bars? Anything fried. You know, you'd order a couple pizzas and the band would share it. And it's just not a healthy way to go. So not only were you breathing in smoke at one time, you were drinking, let's say, and then you were hungry and you would eat crappy bar food. So doing that every weekend began to add up. And I noticed that I wasn't feeling too healthy, and I'm like, man, I just need a weekend off just to get back to normal. Sometimes I'm not really feeling up to being social. And whenever I played a gig, you know, I had to be out there. Sometimes I would try to avoid people by waiting in the back room, like the green room. But you eventually have to come out and people come up to you. And I felt like I was forcing myself to be social. And it was kind of uncomfortable, even though it was probably healthy for me to be a little bit social. But then there'd be things like weddings where you'd have to act really excited because the bride's going to come up and talk. And I just hated putting a fake smile on for anybody. This might seem like a weird thing to gripe about, but I got kind of tired of putting on airs and acting like, oh, I'm so excited because this wedding is going on. But you had to because you're getting paid. You're the wedding band, you know? That's probably why I love watching Wedding Singer so much, because there's that scene where Adam Sandler finally loses it. He's tired of like putting on airs, and he actually ends up punching the bride's father, I think. But and the last thing I'll talk about is the drive that we had to make sometimes to certain gigs. When I was in the country band, we had to take whatever gigs we can get, and a lot of times the places that were paying the most were on the outskirts of town, if you will. So a lot of times we had to play in very small towns, in very remote areas. And sometimes, you know, from where I'm from, Minnesota, I had to drive to the middle of, say, Wisconsin, Iowa, just surrounding areas. But you'd find yourself driving for a long time, and all of a sudden you start hitting dirt roads, and you're like, uh-oh. And this is back before cell phones. So we would play a show, and maybe it would start snowing out. And I'd be looking outside like, uh-oh, I have to drive home tonight. Hopefully I can make it. So you would drive home, and you would just hope you didn't break down in a cornfield or something. And if you did break down back then, not having a cell phone, you just had to hope somebody happens to drive by and help you. Otherwise, I guess you just fall asleep and hope you don't die. There was a time after a gig where it snowed so hard you couldn't even see the road anymore. And I was trying to stay in between the signs that were on either side of the road and the lights. And I just couldn't do it, so I had to pull over and stay at a hotel. And I remember it was a fun night. I just brought my guitar and practiced all night, but I ended up spending all the money I made at the gig to pay for the hotel, so the whole night was kind of a wash. So those are 10 things I don't miss about playing live. Like I said, I'll try to put one out about all the things that I miss about playing live, just to balance this out. But hopefully you enjoyed my stories, and I guess we'll catch you at the next lesson. Thanks, guys. Bye.